right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this limited series interview, Think Business Exclusives, Getting to the Soul of Business. Looking really forward to this interview with Jamie Wollam. Jamie, I'm really grateful. One of the things I love is music. And one of the things I love about music is that it just takes you back in time. I'm going to be 50 years old. And when I listen to certain music, it can take me back all the way, I think, till I'm like 5, 6, 7 years old, no matter what it is. Let me give everybody just a quick intro on you. You're currently the drum chair for Tears for Fears, and you've been doing that since 2010. You were born in Los Angeles, California, dual citizen of Canada, and currently lives in Vancouver area of British Columbia, Canada. You began your journey in music at the age of 10 after your mom took you to see Kiss. My grandmother's best friend was the manager of Kiss.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I will talk about Kiss. You were mesmerized by the just spectacular volume and power of the whole thing, and thus began just countless hours of lessons and practicing and events that would shape your path. You've been in the studio with musicians and a touring drummer for the past 30 years and played and recorded with Jackson Browne, Venice, David Crosby. I love Crosby, Still Nash. I love everybody, all of these artists. Michael Jackson, the Tories, Avian, Tom Morello, and just a ton of others. Right now, you're with Tears for Fears, as we said, and you have a new release, a new album coming out, and world tour of the Tears for Fears new album, The Tipping Point. So much to kind of dive into, so much to talk about, but I wanna rewind to the 10-year-old that you talk about, because to me, there's so much to learn from someone, and what just ignited them, right? I always love to talk to people about what ignites them, so what was it at the age of 10 that just ignited you? I remember I was at a concert for Billy Joel and Elton John, and I say this not arrogantly, but I remember sitting there and everybody came out and stood for them, and I remember thinking, I'm going to be doing this one day. I was 21 years old, but I'm going to be speaking, not singing. And I just felt it. And so I want to know, like, what did you feel? What was that thing in your gut when you were 10 years old?
Well, I think it's a fantastic question. And I think the best way, I've never really thought about it too intently, and I'm kind of glad that you asked, right? So I'll put it into words the best I can at the moment, but I think it was a combination of two things. The main one being my uncle, was my father's youngest brother, who was quite younger than my father. He's only a couple years older than me. Was a drummer. So I think when I was 10, he was 14, something like that. And so he was a drummer. And so when I would go visit my grandparents, and he lived there and still lived at home, he was playing drums his favorite drummer was Keith Moon from The Who. So he wasn't playing soft. He was playing Frank Zappa and The Who and lots of rock and roll. And
Rob O'Reilly, one of my
the biggest drum solo. Yeah, Won't Get Fooled Again. Some of the Keith Moon's legends. So I was just mesmerized and kind of oddly intimidated, but fascinated to watch him play. And then, of course, I knew nothing about it, but he'd let me get behind the set and just bang around like you've seen kids do a million times. So I knew that I gravitated toward that instrument. I also knew that, as weird as it sounded, my father, who didn't ever do music professionally, but is very talented and loves music, always had guitars. But I knew that I couldn't play guitar because even at 10 years old, I'm left-handed. So he had guitars that were right-handed. I'd pick them up and even from that age, which I kind of kick myself now. I never learned how to play right-handed. I always would pick up his right-handed guitar and play it upside down. I could get by. So I did love playing, but it was always that roadblock of me thinking, it's too hard to play upside down, whatever. Drums are cool. And since I was starting from scratch with drums, I could start. It was my uncle who made me learn right-handed anyway. So I don't play left-handed drums like Phil Collins or some. I play a right-handed kit because I learned from the get-go. My uncle actually made me learn right-handed, right? So so it was a combination of that, and it was just the fact that at that age, I don't know how it came about. I think it's like every kid who loves Kiss was just like a comic book to me.
They were a comic book.
The sheer craziness of the imagery, and it was so well cultivated and intentionally cultivated to be the combination of you know, a musical thing, but with this one of the most bombastic business approaches. And you know, anyone who's ever heard Gene Simmons speaks knows from the get-go they wanted to do something that was very risky, because it wasn't really about their music.
Right.
Although you can ask musicians, like, I mean, Kiss is Kiss, right? You've got songs like Love Gun and I Was Made for Loving You, and not a whole lot of depth there, not a whole lot of musical ingenuity there, but just good, solid rock and roll songs. But it was about the entire package, which no one has ever since or still has achieved that level of visual. And you either kind of hated them or loved them. And as a kid, I couldn't get enough of it. As soon as I saw and heard their first record, and so I was just super into them. I would listen to their records every day. This was before, and then I just begged my mom, and I'd never been to a live concert before, but I knew that Kiss. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I knew they were coming to the Forum, which is a very well known place, and I talked her into getting tickets for my older sister, myself, and her, and she took me. And I just remember I didn't cry, because I wasn't quite that. It wasn't that type of emotion. But I think if I could see a picture of myself, I think my jaw would have been the whole time, and my eyes were huge. I could not believe what I was seeing. And then I also remember walking out of there, and I couldn't hear right for probably a day and a half. It was just, I'd never experienced that level of musical volume ever. And it was so loud, and the explosions and the whole thing.
They were nuts.
It was insane, even by today's standards. And this was 1980 when I was 10 years old. Even by today's standards, what they pulled off then and are still doing is more like, it's just crazy. It's crazy. But that was it. I just said, I want to do this. I want to do this. And Peter Criss was my idol. And so I just kept begging, and I got my first drum set when I think just for my birthday when I was 10.
Yeah. I love that story. A comment on Kiss, right? They understood the power of how to productize yourself
beyond any musical act, I think, that's ever been. Maybe Madonna is close, maybe like Michael Jackson, obviously, but you know, the thing about them is, again, they weren't incredible. There's intricacies about their songs and playing that you can ask musicians of 30, 40 years ago. No one sounds like Kiss, because there's an art to sounding that weird New York grungy, right? That they did. But point being, they weren't very skilled musicians, so it was all about the presentation of what attracted people to the thing, the hype and the glam and just the in your faceness of it, and it was all perfectly planned. And very risky, in my opinion. Like they could have easily had people.
Scary for the day.
Exactly. If no one bit and no one sunk into it. But I think it was also the one simple line about, like, no one's ever done this before, so I think it's going to blow people away in a good way. Whoever believed that enough to go, let's do it. Like, no one's done anything that's the risk factor, right? So once they all said okay and they're in for it, then you have to believe in it, right?
Well, it's kind of like, and those were the times of Alice Cooper and
and the Dolls,
that level of shock. Let me ask you a question. So you get your drum set at 10 years old, right? What was it about? So I play piano, right? And when I sit down and play piano, I don't play really for anybody. My family hears me play, but there's a certain frequency and vibration of when I play, right? The meditativeness of it. What is it about the frequency vibration of the drums for you that kind of speaks to you?
Yeah, I think, well, I can tell you this, at that point in my life, and for most of then into my teenage years and my adult life, it was two things particularly about the drums. And, you know, I run the risk, if you asked me this 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even, I might have, if I heard myself say what I'm going to say, I might have thought, oh, that sounds pretty, you know, whatever, pretty, what's the word I can use? Like pretty out there, maybe a little Grateful Dead-y, you know, Deadhead, like whatever but I've had so much happen in my life and come full circle to some parts of my life, my drumming included, that I believe this wholeheartedly. There was something about just the rhythmic pulse, and a lot of people believe and even teach the fact that rhythm is so deeply connected within every human, with starting with your heartbeat. So just that initial, thump of your heartbeat that's consistent. And I hear it. I was drawn to that. And again, the fact that when you play rhythm correctly, the way that it's inherent. I mean, when you learn how to play rhythm, you understand the theory behind it and how it's broken down and communicated. But there's plenty of guys that can play music, and especially play drums, that have never been taught anything. They inherently do it from listening to others or just going for it themselves. So with drums, it was about the connection with, I think, just the inner pulse of myself when I was young. I did spend a lot of time as a child and as a youngster. My parents were split when I was very young, and so we lived with my mom full time, and she worked a full-time job. So my sister and I would come home from school, bring ourselves home from school, and be in the house to take care of ourselves. I'm not talking at 5, but when I was 10, 11, 12, and my sister's 3 years older, we were alone from the time we got home at school at 2:15, 2:30 till 5 o'clock at night, 6 o'clock at night. So I had a lot of time with myself. And I just think that it's how I found listening to music. And especially for some reason, I think it was the animalistic approach of the drums too. That's why it was always rock. I love jazz. I've gotten into many, but it was always rock and roll, because it was just the power behind it. It was a good way of a release. I can tell you that. There was, I think there's very little chance I'll ever have stress-related health issues or ulcers or things like that, because it's an amazing physical release as well. But I think it has to do with the drawing back to the initial kind of core of, it's why Indians danced around drum beats when they didn't have melodic instruments. It has to do with your innate, starting with the heartbeat. And I think, like I said, just the ability when rhythm is played right and from the heart, people usually can't help but move, whether it's their head or their body or so that was what I think attracted to me. And then just the fact that I got to hit things, right? There was a power behind it. And I'll finish with this. I think there was a big part of it. The drummer's usually pretty hidden. Like the drummer's always behind. You can have a big giant kit where you barely see the guy. But I never wanted to be a front man. I was never, as much as you can think, to be a musician, period, you must have a certain level of egotism or ego involved. Doesn't mean that's bad or unhealthy, but I never wanted to be out in the front. I liked the ability to feel like I was driving the machine, because I think musically the drummer is the driving force behind any band. But I like that it wouldn't be the most upfront notice position, because I wasn't comfortable with having that much attention.
I get that.
Yeah,
I get that. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you a question. I'm just kind of thinking about some of the things you said. Mm-hmm. Where do you think, you were saying, well, that may be out there, this and the other. So let's kind of stay out there a little bit, right?
Sure.
So where do you think your life would be today, or where do you think your path would have gone if your mom said that she would not take you to the Kiss concert and you never ended up going there? It's like, as a kid, I read Choose Your Own Adventure books. Did you ever read those? And
of course.
What do you think that path would have looked like? Or how long would it have been until you found your path?
Yeah,
I say that for 2 reasons, because I think we all have guides in our life, right? Mm-hmm. So in this scenario, Kiss was maybe your guide, but it was really your mom, or reverse engineering it to your uncle, kind of guiding you. Like all of these guides kind of, doing what they need to do in their part to kind of get your path of fulfillment started.
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question. And I sort of want to answer in 2 parts, because you brought up something to me that I'd like to communicate that might take us into an interesting part of my life's journey too. Yeah. So I'll say it now before I forget it, and maybe we can hopefully remember to come back to it. I'll take it back to this. My uncle, in my adult years, especially I'd want to say 5-6 years ago, because the music business is an incredibly tough business as well. Very, 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 very tough. And so I've had my bumps and bruises and contusions and stitches and open heart surgery, frankly, as a result of some of the pitfalls of the entertainment business. And I remember at one point my uncle telling me quite a few years ago, when I was really having a hard time with some stuff, he actually communicated to me, "I'm sorry." And I was like, "You're sorry for what?" And he's like, "I'm just sorry for ever getting you into that." Because point being, he somewhat, I think, maybe felt somewhat responsible, because he was a fantastic musician and did it, but never reached the same professional level of doing it as a career. But is one of my idols as far as his ability musically.
Right.
But he had different. He grew up in Oregon, probably didn't have near the same opportunities I had musically, being from and living in Los Angeles. So, but yeah, he chose a different path than doing music professionally, and so I never really thought about it. But he actually did say, like, "I'm sorry for," kind of lightheartedly, but with a tone of seriousness to it, because I think he felt bad that, like, I would, as well as being taught a lot of the ins and outs of music in general and drumming and all that stuff, I was never really got an education on the lifestyle that goes along with it. So, but as far as
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Did you ever see the movie Supermensch, The Legend of Shep Gordon?
I absolutely did.
So in that movie, it's one of my
great movie.
It's one of my favorite movies. It's just I've watched it a couple of times, but in it he talks about, and I'm getting some of the words wrong, but he talks about, if he's successful in basically being the agent of and building the brand of these rock stars, right? Then that usually means they're going to die.
Yeah.
Right. Because, and so it's like, it was like such a heavy line. I can't remember exactly how he said it, but, and not all of his did, but to your point, he was just emphasizing the lifestyle.
I think I've always been able to sum it up, and that was a fantastic thing to point out. I think I just look at it like this. Imagine the few moments of extraction that someone who enjoys what that artist does, that they're able to extract a great deal from a person without even ever, like, Kiss is my idols. I even pondered if one of the questions might be like, who in the business would you, if you had a chance to meet someone, would you still want to meet or whatever? And I was going to answer Kiss, right? Because I've never met them.
Yeah.
And yet, and lots of people have and whatever. I've just never been in the same circumstances to ever meet any of the original members of Kiss. But my point being, the amount of work that actually goes into providing material, whether it's socially, records, touring, in the studio, all of that, to reach the level of the amount of people, and it may never involve personal interaction, but my point is, it taxes the soul incredibly. And again, me never even being a front man or having that even remotely that type of spotlight on me, just from what I've experienced being a professional drummer in a lot of these situations, the amount of output that you have to be prepared for or willing to give is exceptional. And you have to, what's that?
Go ahead. No, sorry. Go ahead.
Just you have to be willing, because you're going to be miserable if you're not willing to give it. Then you probably shouldn't have gotten into the business. First of all, I believe this wholeheartedly. I've seen interviews with some other famous musicians, I won't name names, but that have said stuff like, yeah, I've never wanted to be famous. I've never wanted to be. I think they're absolutely full of shit. And that's a lie. Whether they're just being dishonest with themselves, but of course you did. Of course you did. You wanted to be, that was the outlet, whether it was sports in high school or grade school or music or art or some other form of whatever you like, you have to have a certain ilk to want to be a performer, especially a musician up front. And whatever the age old joke is, it was either girls or it was whatever, like but the point being is, you wanted that attention. Now, where that comes from, that could be a whole nother 3-hour conversation.
That's another show, right?
But I think that was a part of me that fed into that from a young age too. I wanted a certain type of attention, but but yeah, point being is it takes a lot out of you. And I think there's very, very few people that have navigated the business without hitting big enough potholes that they have to find balance with that. Otherwise it will drive, because the desire for someone, especially if you're in the prime of your career, you the fuse is lit and you're all of a sudden the hot thing. I mean, you look at anybody, God, from Justin Bieber to anyone who's had these young kids up to,
Right.
you've had these incredible amounts of success, and it either has in many cases ruined their lives or taken their lives, or it's had them, they've hit such a bottom and skid along the bottom throughout the press or something, and into addiction and into stuff that they've had to either straighten up and find balance for themselves, or it will just eat you up. It's a never ending want for information and product from you, you know?
Yeah. Let's talk about addiction for a minute. You know, in Shep's movie, Shep Gordon Supermensch, you know, it's highlighted a lot, the life, the addiction, you know, and so what was that journey for you?
That was, thank you for asking. And I go into this subject absolutely wide open with really no filter. I can say this, compared to what it could have been and compared to what it has been for many, I probably got off relatively unscathed, relatively, but that's probably trying to play it down for myself. Like, if you ask my family and friends and people that have seen me at some of the roughest points I've been in, they would not tell you. They all probably, I could probably name 10 people that when in the throes of my alcoholism had a lot of fear and a lot of doubt that I'd make it out because of how badly I was, how badly I was living, drinking, how bad it had gotten. I'd burned a lot of bridges. You just do that because the core of addiction, and again, this is it's not difficult to talk about. It's sometimes difficult for people who may not have had experience, but it's weird. We just hit 2022. I'd be willing to bet the 10% of humanity out there are the 10% that have not had some interaction with addiction. I'm talking just interaction. I'm not saying they're 90% are addicts. I'm saying, but has had a relationship with someone close to them and witnessed them going through that. So I think to talk about it and people can go, oh yeah, I remember that. It's an incredibly selfish disease. Addiction is, however, it's, and I say that because I can say that from experience. The problem is when you're actively in addiction, you don't view it as selfish. It's hard to, because if the whole time you were doing it, you thought, yeah, I'm really being a jerk and I know it. That's a really hard rub to even go for very long for anyone who's got a soul. But you don't realize it as being such a self-centered way to live. You're just simply trying to continue easing or continuing the behavior to sustain your medication, your checking out. And so in doing that, you start to get desperate, and you can do a lot of things, you know, because of what addiction does to the body and the mind. People at some point when they start you start not being able to be responsible, dependable. You start not showing up because you oversleep. You stay up till all hours of the night. Your body can't take it, or you can't physically go anywhere because you're too inebriated or high to go do anything. And so your responsibilities start to fall apart, which means that usually you run low on money. You know, that's the thing. I'm grateful. I can tell you this, if I was born into, or for some reason when my addiction really kicked in, my alcoholism, if I was loaded financially, I would not be alive. I know that because at some point the running out of that portion of my existence really sends you into a place where you have very little options left to either continue that behavior or even to just live safely, you know?
So when was the day you woke up and realized, you know, I just want to highlight this too. I have family members that are in recovery. You know, where I've been part of studying and reading books and being part of interventions. And I really do believe that it's a disease, and it's when you watch someone come out of addiction and into recovery, it's a beautiful thing. But but when was the day you realized, okay, I'm going to do this. I can do this. And today I'm going to start.
Yeah.
Today I'm going to really surrender to it and say, I have a problem. And I ask on a couple levels. I ask for the person who's listening, who's a family member, who has a family member or a child who's in addiction, or somebody who is listening, who's in addiction and realizes that sounds like me. And you've just raised their awareness, their frequency, their vibration, and just somebody that can then help somebody if somebody can't help themselves.
100%. I appreciate you asking me that, and I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to share at least my experience. Because again, it's only my experience, but I do think that in the journey I've been on through it, and the many people I've talked to on both sides of the fence, meaning people who aren't actively in addiction and those that are in recovery or even still active in their addiction, you can have varying opinions. So this is only my experience, but I have found that there's a lot of through lines and a lot of similar things. I'll say this, this is again with my experience, but I believe this, I hold this as a pretty factual representation of addiction with people. I believe there are 3 steps to where you're at in your journey with it. I believe step 1 is something like, and these are very dumbed down, they're much more intricate than this, but I think the first phase, or you can be at the first step, which is saying that you want to get sober, or saying that you want to, at least, whether you say you want to get sober or you want to stop being unhealthy or active in your addiction, however you want to say it. That's saying you want to do it with your mouth.
Right.
But yet that's the only thing that's happening. Because deep down inside, you still know that you even saying that is a big step for some, but nothing else is following the verbiage of saying that.
Yeah.
The second phase you get to is saying it and actually wanting to, but still not doing the actual work and committing to the work it takes to do it.
Yeah.
But the desire is, and I went through those first 2 steps. I can remember the second step is really painful too, because there was a period where before I got sober that I was drinking so heavily and so much, and I'm talking the dark and dirty stuff, like in a hotel room for 3 days straight with 3 bottles, 3 full fifths of Jack Daniels, and not knowing if it was day or, the curtains are shut, and just coming in and out of sort of consciousness from being passed out and then feeling ill, drinking some more, going back to sleep, watching a movie, falling asleep 10 minutes, just not eating, just some really dark stuff. But it was weird because during a lot of that time, I desperately didn't want to drink, but I had heavy detox periods before, and the detox from alcohol is brutal. It's very, very, very brutal, and it's a very scary thing to go through. And I've been through it a few other times prior to that, and I dreaded having to go through it. I feared it because of going through it. It's like fearing you have to go back to the dentist to get more teeth pulled or something, but on a much grander scale. And so I desperately wanted to get sober and was telling people close to me I want to get sober and wanted to, but I was afraid to stop drinking because I wasn't ready. I was petrified of going through the detox process. And then the last phase is just where you say it with your mouth, you believe it, that you actually know and believe that you want to, and then you're willing to reach out and sort of trust fall into a belief that you can get help, and a network that is available at any given moment for anybody. There's so much recovery and assistance for people who want help and are willing to do it. I just had to let go. And I'll tell you this, the last thing, and I speak openly about it. It's obviously I don't go around with the shirt that says it, but because of repercussions of my drinking, you're talking to a Los Angeles kid who, like I said, was a musician his entire life, raised middle class, upper middle class, drummer for Tears for Fears. This happened to me 3 years ago, less than 3 years ago now, but I had to go into LA County and do jail time for someone who, at this point, this was 3 years ago. I'd been the drummer for Tears for Fears for 7 years. I had been the drummer for I'd been a professional musician with this impression by many that, oh my God, a guy lives an unbelievable life, which in a lot of ways I had. I did 31 days of a 90-day sentence in LA County. And I went in there 31 days sober. But I knew about it. I didn't get arrested and then have to go to jail. This was all repercussions, and through sorting out some quite a bit of time worth of run-ins with my behavior and the law. I had about 4 months, 5 months of lag time between the time I was sentenced to this and the time I actually had to go do it.
Yeah.
Which, you talk about a really bizarre period. I had 5 months of knowing that I was going to have to go do 90 days in LA County to prepare for it, which some could go, well, that's fantastic. Yeah. It's actually, in some ways, it's even worse, because the fear and the dread of never having to do anything like that. So my point is, and out of that 5 month lag time, I still drank and was still very active in my drinking, petrified, for almost 4 months. And then I just knew that I was done. I had to face the fact that I was a month away from going to jail, and I had to get I didn't want to be detoxing in the middle of a cell all of that sounded just beyond my comprehension. So I did it, and I reached out for help, and I got that help, and I went in and I did my piece, and I did 31 days. And so, just to tell you this too, knowing that was finally having to come, and there was no way of getting bailed out, getting someone to help me out, and no strings I could pull, nothing I could borrow, nothing I could buy, whatever, that I just had to go face this. I knew that was the end for me. Meaning my mantra the entire time. And the odd part is, I even thought, and I had people tell me, like, oh, well, it's actually kind of good you're going in, because you'll be able to stay sober, because I had more access to the possibility of becoming unsober in LA County than I can do on my own. And so I didn't realize that either, but I quickly realized so many times while I was in there, I just reminded myself, I don't ever have to go through this again.
Yeah.
I don't ever have to be here again. And it's not knocking anyone else. Everyone has that. My journey is that I don't ever have to be here again if I choose not to. And my choice is to never go back.
Thank you for sharing that story. I appreciate your vulnerability. I appreciate you sharing it. I think, the more we share our stories, especially people who are looked up to, the more people it helps. But as I hear you talk about the darkness and, asking for help, how do you now find the light and get back to center? Because you're human, right? So we all get triggered. So how do you do that now? How do you walk recovery?
That's an excellent question for me. And again, I share from my own personal experience. I've got a few things that are essential. Being a part of a recovery group on a regular basis is essential. So I participate and am an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a fantastic support system for me. And but that's only one minor portion, but it is a portion that I find helpful and strengthening. So, and the beautiful part is, there's so much recovery available out in the world, like getting ready to go on the road again. There's meetings available in every city, and especially since COVID happened, that instigated the launch of Zoom. So there will be Zoom meetings. It really turned the recovery world into amazing thing that I can go online and go and I think that part, everyone's in recovery realized how much of an amazing tool this is, that people can become parts of fellowships in recovery all over the world at all times of the day because of your computer. You can go on at any time. So being active within a recovery group and recovery lifestyle and meetings are very essential for me. But that's not enough, because the rest of their 1 hour time or whatever, and the rest of the 23 hours, what are you doing? Right. So I'll just say this in its simplest form. I keep very close to me the remembrance of there's a saying, and I hope it don't sound cliche, because I really stray away from cliches, but there's a saying in recovery that I've heard a couple times that I hold very dear. And it's that my misery can gladly be refunded back to me at any point in time. Like, no one's making me do this. Right. I can gladly go back. It's wide open. I can drive down and purchase whatever I want and go right back to where I'm at. And I'm free to do that.
Yeah.
And so and that, as weird as it sounds, that took a lot of pressure off of me, thinking like, what do you mean I could never drink? Like, what about I've got children. What about my son's wedding? I want to raise a toast and talk to him about the beautiful subtleties of, smoky peat moss of Irish whiskey and whatever, all these things that your mind thinks are, I blew past that off ramp a long time ago. So, and my son's a happier person, and our relationship is so much more fantastic that I'm sober anyway. But point being, it's always there for me to assume that I want to go back. I just know that. So I keep that remembrance of a lot of things. As silly as it sounds, by my bed, I have my bracelet and a calendar that I made from a Bible page in my jail cell. I got a pencil and I ripped out the back page of the Bible. It was just, and I had to make, because I didn't know how long I was going to be there. I knew 90 days, but there are no clocks. There's no windows. There's no, it's easy to lose track of days at a certain point. And so I made myself a calendar and I taped it to the wall. I keep that calendar and my ID bracelet in a Ziploc bag taped right next to my bed. I see it every morning I do that for me because I just know that I don't ever want to go back. So, but even that, I'll just end with this. Even that is not necessarily enough. I don't know what it takes for everyone. It's interesting. I had nothing to do with the title of this new Tears for Fears record, but it's called The Tipping Point. And I think it's an amazing, and I remember reading the book, The Tipping Point, years ago and thinking it was amazing. But my point is, with recovery and with my life choices, I did hit a point. And for me, whatever it was that allowed me to create enough spark that I desired to be sober more than I desired to be drunk anymore or to be medicated, whatever that was, that 51 versus 49% was the point that allowed me to then let go and begin the journey of recovery. And so, but the one last thing I did want to say is regarding someone that is close to someone who's active in addiction. It's such an incredibly difficult journey because you want to help. And the last thing you feel like you would want to do to your family, like if it's your son or daughter or your parents or your brother or sister, you'd feel like you would be an absolute monster for somehow letting them suffer. You want to do what you do anything to help them. The problem is it's like that old analogy about saving a drowning person, right? You can't, if you're not, you have to get them in a chokehold or whatever. And if you run the risk of getting pulled down, you got to let go, because there's nothing about that's valiant or whatever, if it's going to cause such, and the potential for causing such damage to other people's lives around it. So you have to be willing to set your boundaries, because that decision that happens within every individual is exactly that. It's a inside job that, so there's things that can be done and can be led. But again, with things like taking someone to a rehab or having interventions, those are all amazingly beautiful opportunities, because hopefully that might be the tipping point. That might be that 1%. But if it doesn't happen within the person's heart and soul and mind and whatever body, that they're ready to do the work, unfortunately, it's very hard, very rare that it sticks, because you can't get well for anybody but yourself initially.
Right.
And then you can, it has to start there. Yeah.
It starts with self-awareness.
Correct.
Let me ask you a question. What did you learn on your journey to date? How old are you, Jamie?
51.
51. All right. So I'm going to be 50 this year. So we're somewhat the same age.
100%.
What did you learn on your journey about forgiveness, forgiving others, and what you learned from other people forgiving you?
That's an amazing question. God, that's so well put. I'll try my best. I think I can probably do it pretty quickly. Forgiving myself is the hardest part. That will always be the hardest part. And again, this is solely my journey, but it will probably resonate true with most people who have begun a journey of recovery, or are even still active, because I think that lack of self-forgiveness and self-care can continue to facilitate a cycle of addictive behavior. So, but that still remains to be the hardest. I've come a long way. Some of it is as simple as you just have to let it go.
Yeah.
But I can tell you this, part of what I've learned in recovery, and part of what's sort of asked in recovery, is to do the best you can, be willing to, and open-minded, and then do the work that's necessary to do your best to apology. They call it amends, but the point being is to do the best you can to make something right if there's any chance. And sometimes it will never be right.
Right.
So this sort of stems into forgiving others and having others forgive you. The opportunity to be accountable for the damage that you've done goes a long way.
Yeah.
It really does, because people that cared about me in the first place never wanted to see me. They never wanted to be on the receiving end of whatever my particular bullshit was that day, whether it was a verbal lie, it was a behavior, whatever it was that caused damage. And deep down inside, I would never want to do that or cause that kind of hurt. This is where I talked about earlier about how it's very easy, because the fully affected brain, when you're active in your addiction, isn't thinking normally anyway. So you're not operating with normal perceptors, like knowingly going, that's really going to hurt somebody, but I'll do it anyway.
Yeah.
Half the time that I realized that I've hurt people, I didn't consciously think I was doing that, but I was just so self-absorbed in whatever it was that I wanted. But I can say this, the willingness, and when I talk about doing the work, a great deal of the work of recovery comes after you just simply stop drinking. It's a lot more, because and I'll say this, and some people this might sound shocking, but if I didn't have the rest of if I didn't have the, what do they call it? They call it physical therapy, right? If you hurt your leg and you got to do physiotherapy. If I didn't have the rest of the rehabilitation after just stopping putting alcohol in my system, if I didn't have any of that, just give me the bottle back. Because I'd rather, unfortunately, I'd still rather live that way until I either expired or whatever happened, because the taking away my medication but not giving me any form of rehabilitative therapy is insane. I can't. So part of the process is being accountable. And when I'm honest and sincere to those that I've hurt, I have often found, and have found more often than not, I'd say probably 90% of the time, it does wonders to re-establish relationships.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's miraculous at what happens. And so that facilitates and encourages internal healing, because you learn to forgive yourself as well as others being willing to forgive you.
Yeah.
So the last part of that is I've also had, in 28 months worth of being sober, I've had people that I know I probably will never have relationships with again, or will never believe me, because again, this is many years of destructive behavior and apologizing, but then going right back to the behavior. And I've had to accept that a lot of those relationships will never be mended, or will never be. And that's hard for me to live with. It is hard. It still weighs, and I have to do the work. So through my own meditative work and encouraging myself, the way I get around that too, or the way that I deal with that, is I just have told myself I can still offer them a daily apology or a daily amends by remaining sober today. The best way I could ever show them I'm sincere with my words is that I never have to go back to that behavior again.
Yeah.
And so that does a lot for it.
There's a prayer. I read a book called Ho'oponopono, if you're familiar with it.
I've heard it. I haven't read it, but
yeah. And so the prayer is, it's being able to kind of let go if somebody's mad at you, or if there's something you can't, and it's just something you say and it releases it energetically. And
Beautiful.
The prayer, it's called the Ho'oponopono prayer, is, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And you don't even have to say it out loud. They say you can just say it in your head with a focus and a highlight on someone, and it will shift the energy of it.
And I believe that tremendously, because again, it's what you just said, what you just repeated, this book said, it's the most simplified version, and it doesn't have, and that's the thing. It doesn't have to be, not at all. It really doesn't. The thing that is the hardest part, that I think still remains some of the greatest mysteries, right, about how to handle and how to deal with, because just there's so much, it's everywhere, right? Addiction and abuse, whether it's drug abuse, alcohol abuse, just the level of necessity that mankind seems to have to rely upon things that help you escape or medicate it's just huge. It's huge. But my point is, when you keep it real simple like that, it is very effective at whatever it is, the simplicity. And I believe every human operates at an ability to understand, and I wish they'd get back to it. I wish we could all come back to some in these times too. The world is nuts. in a lot of ways right now. It's been unbelievable. What the world and what mankind and what and the division and the immense stress that we've all been dealing with the world in the last
COVID. It's been nuts. I know.
Unbelievable.
I want to rewind a little bit. Thanks again so much for sharing your story.
Yeah, of course.
Really appreciate it. I want to rewind and go back to your mom, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And her taking you to that Kiss concert.
Yeah.
Right. You know, we all kind of have guides, and sometimes I don't think we see our guides as guides when they're doing something, but she was really, in many ways, the bridge to get the 10-year-old to the concert.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, if you look at, there's so many variables where maybe you couldn't have gotten there, but you did. And so we've dove into a lot of different stuff. So I really want to know, you know, where else in your life was your mom a guide to help you become who you are today?
Again, that would for me probably take another 2 episodes, but I'll put it in. I can say this, and it would probably sound like, oh, anybody hears this would go, he certainly is a little mama's boy and whatever. I can tell you this, and it's, again, we just talked about keeping it simple. I've had all my family, my father, my sister. I've had so much support beyond measure, beyond. I can say this, and it's not about a competition, but I will honestly say it, and I'll tell anybody else this, including those people I just mentioned. My mom has been the biggest supporter of me in my career from day one.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean, like before I could drive, when I was playing in bands when I was 14, 15, I was taking lessons. She was the one that was working full time and would load up my drums in the back of her station wagon and drive me to band practice and then come pick me up. She would take me to gigs when I still wasn't able to drive. She would take me to my drum lessons, drive an hour and a half one way for me to go study with guys that I really wanted to take drum lessons from. She helped me purchase all my equipment when I was, I had a paper route and things, but whenever I wanted, she was always there to help me get my equipment. And she's been to probably, I mean, again, once I started touring professionally, that number, that percentage is going to change. But when she could, she probably attended a good 75 to 80% of any performances, culminating to the fact, and I'll just finish with this. So that's just in my musical journey. I'll tell you this. It was sort of culminated to the fact that she hadn't seen me play too many times, or I think even maybe ever with Tears at this point. And in 2017, Tears played Royal Albert Hall in England, which is, for any, there's an old saying, I think it's either with Carnegie or with Royal Albert Hall, but the whole thing is like, how does a musician get to Albert Hall? And the answer is practice, right? Like it's one of the
practice. It's
one of the most
Hall. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. It's one of the most prestigious places in England, right? And so Tears had never played there. In my many gigs, had never played. So, and my mom living in Canada at the time, and this was just 4 years ago, coming up, it'll be 5 years this year, but at 72 years old, flew from British Columbia, from Vancouver area, all by herself, all the way out to London, and met me, and I got to take her. She got to come to the show and see me play Albert Hall, which is kind of a way of, it came back full circle. So to take your son at 10 to go see Kiss, and then to watch your son perform on stage for a sold out show at the Royal Albert Hall, and to get to see that, it was pretty amazing memory for both of us.
It's great.
As far as, I'll tell you this, as far as the other parts of my life, my mom's also been one of the key reasons why I've been able to have the opportunity to get well, because again, I really burnt almost every bridge, if not every bridge I had when I was living in Los Angeles and really struggling with my addiction. And my mom provided me and offered an opportunity for me to relocate, because I have dual citizenship. So that's the reason I'm up here. I initially came up here to try my best to get well. And I struggled very badly for about a year, even while I was up here, because I resented it. I came because I really ran out of options, but I didn't come. I was probably at somewhere between that first and second phase that I talked about earlier. Yeah. I said I wanted to get sober and maybe felt like, I probably should and could, but I ran out of ability to take care of myself in Los Angeles, and so the opportunity to do that. But the catalyst was, you can come up here and have this opportunity, but you need to get sober.
Yeah.
If not, and that's the boundary that she set. I'm giving you this opportunity, but I'm not going to enable you. If you want to get sober, here's a place and a space, and I will help you in whatever way I can, but you got to do the work. And if you don't do the work, the offer's retracted. Good luck. Get back out there and do the best you can. I have to emotionally let go of this, because it was damaging her. So not only in that musical profession, she was by far my biggest supporter and cheerleader, but even just the opportunity to help me personally in my life, she's been my biggest cheerleader.
Great. Well, kudos to your mom, and kudos for you.
Yeah.
Kudos to you. Let's talk about the album that's coming out. I think it's February 25th, 2022. Is that
correct? Which, again, oddly enough, I didn't realize this until I actually read it recently, but I believe it's the 35th anniversary of the release of Songs from the Big Share.
Oh, so nice. That's
to the day.
That's very cool.
Well planned out.
Yeah. So tell us about the album. It's called let me just say this. It's called The Tipping Point. Mm-hmm. It's being released February 25th, 2022. And it sounds like there's going to be a world tour, assuming the world comes,
assuming the world will have us. Yeah.
Right. So tell us about the album.
What I can tell you is this. There's been 2 singles released so far as of today, which is January 11th. And the third and final pre-release single comes out this Friday. The singles have been, the music so far, what's been released and what people have been able to hear, there's been a pretty tight lock on it as well, because they don't want the album to be able to be listened to in full till they actually release it. So there's a lot of I'm really excited because there's an incredible amount of buzz. I've been in the band 12 years, and this is the first studio album in 17 years. Yeah. So first time I've been a part of the band during the release of an album, and it's incredibly exciting. The buzz and the feedback critically has been immense, from the fans as critiques, and just from those that really get into. And an interesting thing is, a band like Tears for Fears has so much credibility in the music business, and it's so funny because when I joined the band, I come from a lot more of a rock and roll background.
Yeah,
Led Zeppelin, AC/DC, Kiss, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Ozzy Osbourne. Very different than Tears for Fears, although uniquely enough, since I joined the band and where the band has even evolved in the 12 years, they're very much a rock band live. Like when you listen to Tears live, they don't sound they're not a synth band, even though a lot of their earlier music was very considered new wave or a lot of keyboard influenced. But live, it's very much more of a rock band. That's how Kurt and Roland and even the band's vehicle has just morphed into, because it's just, they're a very powerful band live, but they've always had an incredible amount of legitimacy and respect due to their songwriting and a lot of hits. But they get, sometimes, I've had people go like, oh yeah, I remember that band. I got them right about the Flock of Seagulls, and I remember Kaja Gugu. And again, I'm not knocking those bands, but there's no comparison. The validity of their music it stands the test of time, because I think everybody, I just heard this too. Spotify announced that Everybody Wants to Rule the World was the #1 downloaded song from the 80s, or listened to, like,
it's one of the entire
80s.
I've loved Tears for Fears since I was 13. I mean, it takes,
it's iconic.
I told you, I mean, it takes me back to bar and bat mitzvah years and me working at camp. I mean, I can smell camp when I think of Tears for Fears, and it takes me back 35 years. I mean, it takes me back a long
Me
time.
too.
Yeah.
Me too. And
in a great way, in a great
100%. I can still remember where I'm at. I can still see things where I'm at. And funny enough story, I'll just share this, and it always is. It will just always be part of a fun story. But when I was 13, I think at the time, when I was 13, I had this hugest crush on a girl who I knew, who was, she didn't go to my school, but she was a friend of another guy I played in a band with. I'd been playing drums for a few years, and we had a garage band, and he was friends with her. And I just had the hugest crush on her. And I can tell you this, that it was summertime. There was a swim party, had a bunch of people over. And the very first time I got to convey my, like for her, was in the bedroom, standing in his bedroom, and his TV was on and MTV was on. And I kissed this girl for the very first time, and Shout was The video for Shout was on the TV. And I will never forget how deeply that song. So even now I jokingly sometimes smile at it and go, wow, what a trip. When I'm on stage, I'm playing this song on a whole nother peripheral or cerebral level, but I'll still remember that was the same song so that it's iconic, I guess.
It's iconic. In I remember that song. To me, there were these two best friends at where I worked at camp, and their nicknames were Beef and Salami, and they would carry a jam box, like a small jam box, and it would always be playing Shout, you know, like
it's an anthem. I mean, so I can tell you this briefly too, although I'm fascinated knowing how they got their names Beef and Salami.
I don't even know. I don't even know.
It just stuck, I guess. It just stuck. When I got the gig, and I was sent over an email with a file on it that had a bunch of material to learn. At that point in time, I'll be honest with you, that the songs, they just said track 1 through like track 16, they weren't labeled. So I clicked on the first one, and of course you hear that iconic keyboard part, it'll fall down into everybody. And I'm like, yeah, of course, Everybody Wants to Rule the World, one of the most famous shuffle songs as a drummer. And then secondly, I think it was Shout. And then third, it was Mad World. And I'm like, oh yeah, of course I know this song. Yeah, I didn't really think, but I thought, okay, yeah, of course I know this. Then as the songs Sowing the Seeds of Love, which I was like, oh God, yeah, that's right. That's Tears. And then next one was Head Over Heels. I'm like, of course, duh. Then the next one was Break It Down Again. I'm like, good God, that's right. This
got tons.
And then there were even songs. So then so all of that happened. And then the second layer, I click on, I was down by like 8 or 9, and I clicked on a song, and a song called Change came up, which did a little, and I listened to it, and I'm like, oh my God, my entire youth, I thought that was Depeche Mode.
Yeah.
Like I knew the song, I'd heard it everywhere, but I didn't even know it was Tears for Fears, because again, I wasn't at that point when I was younger, I wasn't a huge fan. My point is, I went through this whole 16 songs, and there was probably only 2 that were deeper cuts off the records that they do live, because I was to learn the live set. My point is, I was blown away in understanding and grasping the amount of hits that these guys have had, and the amount of success. Because in 12 years, I've gone all over the world with them. I've gone all over the world and seen some amazingly incredible places, and played in front of some unbelievable crowds who are massive fans. So it's an honor. So I'll just finish with this too. The new record, I can tell you this goes back to, it's a very modern production. Sonically, it's an incredible album, but it definitely harkens back to an earlier time of Tears for Fears. It's a lot more, and anyone who's seen or heard anything about what individually the 2 main guys, Roland and Kurt, have been through, they're coming out the other side of not only where the world's at today, but some incredibly deep and dark experiences personally. So they tapped, rather than go with, that's why this album's taken so long too, but rather than go the standard route of writing for the pop masses and getting together with huge other songwriters and trying to coordinate on these, which they did and lost a lot of time trying to do that, when they gave up on that and went back to the simplistic place of those 2 guys in a room with guitars, and what came out was incredible. So I'm excited.
I'm excited too. I've loved the songs that are available thus far. Big fan of Tears for Fears, always have been. Big fan of yours now, Jamie, too.
Where do you live, John?
Detroit.
Okay, so I'll have to look. I don't know, but there's.
I think you're coming in June, July to Detroit.
Well, there we go. If you would like to go, it'd be my honor. We'll have a chance. Actually,
100%.
Yeah, done deal.
Couple things I want to end with. I just want to recap on a couple highlights that you talked about. The importance for self-awareness, asking for help, having and reaching out to guides, forgiveness, and just being real, right? And I think just being real and being yourself helps so many people. Last couple questions for you. Finish this sentence. I am most grateful for
my sobriety.
Sobriety to me means
being honest, letting my word be valid, keeping my word, and That's a good one. I just staying, keeping it simple.
Yeah,
Very
keeping
simple.
it simple.
Keeping
And then
it
my last question is this:
simple.
anybody who's struggling with addiction of any type, what should they do?
I would say reach out to someone that they trust, someone they know they can share with, and someone hopefully with the clarity. If they're struggling with it, they'll still have enough clarity to understand who it is safe to reach out to. Not someone who's actively in addiction with them, but be willing to reach out to those closest to you who may be removed from your life because they've had to. Be willing to reach out and say, I need help, and I'm willing, and then be willing to do the work. Be willing to follow that up with openness, like they call it surrender. You got to just put down the weapons and then be willing to be led, be open enough, just be open enough to the aspect, and trust that the people that you would provide you help are there for your best interest to help you, because that help is there.
It's there.
100%.
I thought it would be great as we end to, of course, mention again that The Tipping Point comes out February 25th, 2022. The initial songs, a couple songs can be downloaded, on all the platforms. They're great. Rewind and listen to all the Tears for Fears, get reacquainted as your world tour hopefully takes off. I'm sure it will as the world comes back. But I thought we could end very simply. And let me just say before we end, I'm really grateful for your time, your openness, your vulnerability, and just this conversation. It was, I never know where these talks are going to go. So I never rely on a bio. That's why I don't prepare questions, because I just want it to go where it goes. And that's what I love about it. So thank you so much, Jamie. But I thought
it's my pleasure. And if you would allow me 10 seconds to say this, I think it speaks incredible volumes for who you are as a person, because if I'm here with whatever I can share, you still have to be willing to be present and extract from me and guide it too, which means that we're on the same wavelength.
We're on the same.
So my gratitude to you for doing this podcast, for inviting me to do it, and
thank you,
being willing to give me a space to share some of the things. And it's a really beautiful opportunity. So thank you as well, because it's beneficial to both of us to speak openly and be human, as human as we can be. Right.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. I thought we could end with maybe you just sharing the serenity prayer.
Absolutely. I'd be honored. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Actually, it's the courage, right? Grant me the courage to accept the things I cannot change.
Yeah.
Change the things I can, and the willingness to know the difference, and the wisdom to know the difference.
There we go.
Yeah. Right. So sorry, I haven't actually been on the spot to say it. I was like, oh my God. I find myself, so if I may say this too.
Yeah.
The whole point of the serenity prayer, and what I find, how I word it differently to myself, but I word it to myself every day. And I'll say this, it comes at the end of every meeting. So I know it when it comes there. What I tell myself numerous times a day, and I have to, right, is I constantly tell myself, God, I can't fix this. Yeah. You fix it. Please let me know what I can do.
Yeah.
And that's how I say it. God, I can't fix this, or God, I can fix this. You have to fix this. Please tell me what to do. Right. Which is
surrender and do it. I love it.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Think community. This has been a great talk. If you know anybody in addiction, if you are in addiction and you need help, there are so many places that you can. Is there a hotline or something, Jamie?
If you literally go into, and again, it depends, but if you literally go into any web browser and just type in drug addiction, if it's alcohol, you can literally type in Alcoholics Anonymous. There's an 800 number that will get you to a hotline that someone will be on the phone with you in seconds and will help you, just talk to you about where you're at. It starts with just the willingness to reach out. Yeah. But there's plenty of material and resources available. Plenty.
Jamie, thanks, man. This was great. Think community, thanks so much for joining us. If you know anybody who could benefit from this podcast, please share. Jamie, thanks. I loved it.
Thank you so much, John.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. Bye.
Grateful for it.
You got it.